thank you so much for coming out tonight, and oh my God, thank you for all of those things. Me too. In my life of being a composer and working in different parts of the world, I found out that very few things, very few big things happen without good food attached. So, welcome. Yes, Watershed Voices. This is a 2-year project with the Lake Champlain Basin Program, and what we'll be doing is writing music, okay, about the Champlain watershed, okay, from the perspectives of Vermont and New York and Quebec, performing music in those places as well, and trying to listen to the lake in a new way. Okay, to give the lake a new way to speak to us and to sing to us. Just so we know what's coming ahead of us here in the next 2 years, I'm going to be mentoring 3 composers of different musical backgrounds that will be taking various data from the lake and using that data as the inspiration for their music. Okay, and they'll interpret that data within their own musical styles and their own musical traditions. And so what we're seeing tonight really is very much a kickoff for the program. So thank you all for being here for this, to share the process of what our composers are going to be going through. And actually, you folks are going to get a chance to do a little bit of that process yourselves here tonight. So, Watershed Voices, giving the lake a musical voice. What we're talking about is a particular kind of composing technique, okay, that has existed in classical music, mostly in the sort of parts of classical music conservatories that have been dealing with electronic music. Okay, sonification has mostly lived in that world. Okay, my interest here for this project is to take it out of that world and into the sort of human performance. And what sonification is, okay, is basically the translation of numbers into sound. Now, when all of you were in 3rd grade, your teacher taught you how to translate a bunch of numbers into a picture, right? We call those line graphs and bar graphs. Because, of course, if you look at data in a 2D expression, that allows us to experience the truth behind that data. The data can speak to us in a new way by seeing it in a picture that we can't if we're just looking at an endless list of numbers in front of us. Right? Well, sonification is just simply the act of making a musical graph. Okay, translating these numbers into a musical picture in some way. Why do this? Okay, well, it's a new way to it's a new sense to bring into the experience of science. Okay, we are a profoundly visual culture. We like to look at things. We like to analyze things with our eyes, but there's very few professions that actually require a person to use their ears in an analytical capacity. Among the short list of those professions, a musician, a sonar director, and an ornithologist. Right? But the rest of us mostly use our hearing in a very passive way. Okay, we interpret the world around us kind of passively. If for example, in the middle of my presentation, okay, I could tell if someone went out and started their car without having to look through the wall to see the car was there, because I could hear it through that door in the wall, right? Okay, that would tell me what that is, right? Okay, but that's a passive thing. Most of us don't study how to use our ears to analyze things in a deep and profound kind of way. Sonification opens that up. Okay, it opens up the possibility for visually impaired scientists to now to do deep data analysis. Okay, because now they'll have access to data in the same way that the rest of the seeing world has always had the luxury of doing. Another reason to do it is that you find new musical stories in the data. I know every year when I go around tax time, okay, and I go over to the accountant, this marvelous man who's had great patience with me over the years of running a music business, and Tom would look at me as I handed him all the paperwork with the profit and loss statement and all that, and Tom would gently look at me with this sort of calm voice, and he would say, "Glenn, I know that you look at this and just see a bunch of numbers. When I look at this, I see a story of what your business did this year." Okay, and that's what we want to do musically with the lake. Okay, we want to take these amazing data sets collected by the scientists among us to listen to the lake in a new way, to hear the stories that the lake has to tell us. So let's just take a look at the background of the sort of cultural background. Yes, Jim said I'm a humanities teacher, so yes, we have to start in ancient Greece. Okay, that turns out this guy named Pythagoras did more than just simply write that equation that the 10th graders have to use on their Regents exams. He actually had some pretty broad theories about how the world was put together and what happiness was, and how to cultivate a good life. In what we now call southern Italy, he had this place which is kind of half monastery, half Club Med, right? For people to come and study these new ways of seeking happiness in the world. One of the things that Pythagoras gives us through his many teachers and chroniclers, he says this thing, all is number. Everything is numbers. Well, any scientist among us knows that that's your job, is to take all that nice stuff out there and turn it into a number, and list of numbers so we can study it, right? Okay, everything is number. And he had these really interesting ideas. He said that if you just have numbers alone, all you have is arithmetic. If you put numbers in space, then you get geometry. That makes sense, right? Okay. A squared plus b squared equals c squared, triangle, right? Here's where it gets interesting. Pythagoras says that numbers in time equals music. And then when it gets really interesting, he says when you put numbers in space and time, you get astronomy. Okay, this ancient notion of the music of the spheres, where the heavenly bodies moved around in the sky in this harmonic, in this musical kind of balanced way, okay, that the ancient Greeks saw. But Pythagoras is a good place for us to begin our journey here. Also, one of the a later Greek, okay, this fellow named Aristotle, he had this really interesting idea. He said that everything in the world has two qualities to it. One is essence, the other is accidents. The essence of something is the eternal thing that never changes. The accidents of that thing is just simply the temporary expression of whatever the essence is. So for example, okay, you are looking at 57-year-old Glenn right now, right? Okay, you're looking at Glenn, you're hearing me do my thing, right? Okay, but you're looking at the 57-year-old version of that, okay? When I was 9, I was still Glenn. There was an essence of me as a 9-year-old that I still carry with me now at 57. But the expression of that was much different. It was much shorter, it was much skinnier, okay, much goofier, okay, well, maybe not, okay. But the expression of that essence of Glenness still exists between those two times, and I hope that when I'm 85 years old, there's some part of that essence which still persists. So in this case, you know, all of these things, all of these three things are all the essence of what a right triangle is. There's a picture, there's some words, and then there's an equation. So we transfer the essence of something through numbers and into other expressions. And so this notion of sonification allows us to do that, right? We look at the beautiful lake out there. We feel the breeze. Okay, we enjoy it, but then we study it, right? Okay, looking at the lake, you know, from the perspective of an Adirondack chair, gives us some of the essence of the lake in a certain expression. Okay, the numbers from scientists give us an expression of that essence in a different way. Okay, and so now what we're going to do is, with the help of those numbers, turn things into some music. So how do composers paint these musical pictures? Okay, lots of times composers like to imitate the sounds of nature. Okay, if you remember, okay, watching that beautiful rain scene in the Disney movie Bambi, okay, where the raindrops are falling, right, and you see all the little creatures in the forest, and the orchestra goes. And then of course when the thunder comes in, okay, you know the bass drum in the back of the orchestra rumbles away, right? Because that imitates those sounds, right? Okay, composers like to imitate the sounds of nature. Sometimes we might use cultural sounds. Okay, if we are telling the indigenous story of Lake Champlain. Okay, well, perhaps we want to use a water drum. We want to use those instruments that reference a certain cultural experience of the lake. But then when we get into these abstract sounds, this is where it gets kind of fun. Okay? Now, I'm going to sing two notes. And I want you to tell me what picture comes up in your mind. Only two notes. Two notes played on the lowest string of a cello. Da-dum.
Shark. Shark.
A shark. Now let's just ask the question here. Okay, right? Okay. Does a shark sound like a cello when it swims? No. Okay, so it's not the imitated thing, right? Okay. Does the shark play like cello in the Coral Reef Community Orchestra? No, so it's not a cultural thing, right? So why is it that those two notes on a cello, for almost every American and probably lots of other folks around the world, bring that specific image up? Well, John Williams, the composer, okay, the greatest film composer of our time, right? He wrote those two notes, right? But of course he wrote just not two notes, he put them in context, right? It starts off, da-dum, 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 dum-dum-dum-dum-dum-dum-dum-dum. Yeah. Right? So, look what John Williams does. If you take away the two notes, that minor second, okay, that he writes between those two notes, and you just listen to the rhythm, what did John Williams do for us? Dum dum, dum dum, dum dum, dum dum, dum dum, dum dum, dum dum. What is that?
Play with our imagination.
No, what's that?
Start the scene.
It's a heartbeat, right? And it's a heartbeat when you are feeling how? Excited or scared, right? Right. Now, had John Williams just simply, put that in the bass drum part, and the bass drum went dum dum, dum. All of us would be like, oh, come on, John, that's a heartbeat. Can't you think a little bit bigger than this here, John, right? But no, what did he do? He put the heartbeat rhythm in it, but then he added that minor second, which is an inherently dissonant interval. It creates tension in us, right? Frequencies do that, okay, in that interval. And so because he adds those two notes to it, now it's not a general fear of anything. It's actually a specific fear of that thing that we saw on the movie when we heard it. And now forever, humanity will always associate those two notes with a big nasty shark that's about to eat them up. Okay. The other thing that John Williams did with that, by the way, okay, in playing with the heartbeat, one of the things that a lot of work in music and health has been starting to uncover is that when we feel that a piece of music is slow, that normally means that the tempo of that is slower than our standing heart rate is. When we feel that the music is fast, that means it's above our standing heart rate. Okay, why do professional athletes listen to fast rhythmic music? Why do they listen to that just before the game? When you say pumped up, what happens is that when we listen to music, our heart wants to adjust to the tempo that's being played toward. Physiologically, we do this without even thinking about it. Right? And so we get into this world of abstract sounds, right? Where we can create these musical symbols for specific things in nature. One of the marvelous groups of scientists I worked with a few years back was at the European Space Agency. The Rosetta mission. You may recall a few years back, the Europeans flew an orbiter for 9 years. They flew this thing, and after 9 years, that orbiter came around and encountered a comet and then dropped a lander on the comet. First time in human history that has ever been done. An astonishing feat of scientific genius and persistence and hard work. It's just amazing. And I got to hang out with the mathematicians that flew that satellite for 9 years, right? And so they gave me this data from the day that the orbiter encountered the comet after this long 9-year journey. Okay, and finally had reached its goal. And what this is the trajectory of the orbiter, okay, on those days when it arrived. Okay, so you can see over here, 2014. Okay, that was the year. Okay, this is the day here. Okay, and then these are all of the other geometric points that help them steer this thing. Okay, I took that data and sonified it. Okay, with this mathematical process. Okay, we're going to do a little bit of this a little bit later in our time here. It's called modular mathematics. Okay, you take a list of numbers, you find the difference between the lowest and the highest, you divide it up into equal chunks. Okay, and those are modules of data. And then you go back and align those with musical notes. We're going to be doing that in a second here. But what I ended up with was a piece of music that was for choir and string quartet. Okay, because of course the European Space Agency has its own choir and its own string quartet. It also has a theater group, it has a dance group, it has painting lessons, sculpture lessons. They really value this connection between scientists and artists. I don't think NASA has all of those things, but it's not a very American thing. But here's that piece of music. It's called Variations on a Day in Space. And the first thing that you hear is the raw sonified data. I didn't change a thing. It's what came from the math. And of course, this is going to be parallel data sets, as you saw, okay, with the flight data. So if you have parallel data sets, well, you read them vertically and horizontally. If you have parallel musical lines, you not only get melodies, but you also get harmonies, and you read it vertically, right? Okay, so I took 4 of those data sets and sonified it, and so the first variation is just the raw sonification, and then there's 2 other variations of which, as a composer, I played with it a little while here. Here we go. most of those images were the images that the orbiter took of the comet. So,
and the images corresponded to what was happening as it moved closer, and
not in a straight line, because actually what we did was variations on the same set of data that was repeated. Okay, but the idea is, of course, is that we create the sort of core musical content, and then composers do what composers do with it, right? Okay, and in this case, you know, shooting for that longing. Sorry. Okay. In this case, I was shooting for that sense of longing of traveling for 9 years in the emptiness of space, and then finally finding that thing that you had traveled so long to seek out.
I'm so glad the chords resolved at the end.
Oh, yeah. And it's astonishing. Just running it through the sonification did that.
I know, that was great.
I didn't even have to do that myself, so it was wonderful. One other example here before we start to put all of you to work, okay? And the Adirondack Folk Opera project I've been involved in over in the High Peaks area, retelling this pre-Civil War voting rights story that happened in our town with John Brown and Frederick Douglass and some other big names in the abolition business in the 1850s. We wanted to embed that, you know, the landscape into the piece, and so one of the pieces that we did is this tune called "Procession of the Pines." It's a setting of a portion of Ralph Waldo Emerson's poem called "The Adirondacks." Okay, and in the first part of the tune, okay, this is just me writing some music that's referential to the mid-19th century and that sort of thing. But then what happens in the last section of the piece, once you hear the piano come in, okay, the piano part is the sonified version of some data that I'm just going to move out of the PowerPoint just for a second here. My friend and colleague Kurt Stager, okay, who also has supported some of these Lake Champlain Basin Artist in Residence programs. He himself is a wonderful banjo player, by the way, and climate scientist. He took lake core samples from Wolf Lake, okay, which is also part of the watershed here, and he was measuring, okay, various things at each level of those lake core samples, and his data set starts up here in 2012, right over here. And because he dug down deep enough, his data set goes all the way down to the year 337.
Wow.
So it's an astonishing climate record, okay, going back all the way to the time of the Roman Empire, here in Wolf Lake. And so what you see here, okay, are these measurements of diatoms, okay, which were ways to interpret the various elements of climate. Okay, here are those measurements. Okay, this is the actual measurement of the core sample itself. Okay, and then here are two columns of sonified musical notes that come from the process we're going to show you in just a second. One of them we would call mod 7, meaning you're translating these numbers into 7 notes. Do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti. And do is just the same as do, right? But a little bit higher, right? Okay, so mod 7 would be to take a whole bunch of numbers and translate them into 7 notes. The second column is mod 11. You're going to use all keys of the piano and get a different musical expression out of that. So when we get to the piano, you're going to hear Wolf Lake, okay, speaking to us from the years 1840 to 1860.
Glenn,
Yes.
how deep did they have to go to get the samples back for the year 233?
Take a quick look at the. Data set here. I believe these numbers right here, okay, that these are in inches, I believe. Let's see if Kurt gave us that. No?
Yeah, this isn't my data set, but it looks like it says the centimeters
Oh,
on the top.
okay, centimeters. Thank you. Yeah. So if we're gonna go all the way down to the year 337, we're talking about 61.25 centimeters. Yeah, in the bottom of the lake. Yeah.
So it's 2 feet.
And what are the diatoms measuring?
It's the content of planktonic matter in there. Can you do this?
Yes,
Go.
my background is actually in geology,
Yeah.
so limnology is
Yeah.
right in my wheelhouse. So by measuring the diversity of the platonic bodies, the diatoms, you can get a sense for what the climate was like at the time. So depending on how much genetic variation you have in the populations in your sample, it can tell you about the temperature, the weather conditions. You also learn quite a bit from the actual thickness of the layer in the lake. So with these small ponds that don't get a lot of sediment washed into them, because a lot of times they don't have major rivers dumping into them, you get pretty discrete layers every year. It's kind of like when we look at tree rings and we think about counting back, and that tree ring records the environment that tree was in each year. You can actually count down through the thickness of that sediment and see different events that occurred. So if you had a really stormy year, you would have a thicker layer of sediment than if you had a very calm year. So there's all sorts of different ways to learn about climate and the environment by looking at these lake cores.
Okay. Kurt Sager feels good right now and doesn't know why. Right. Okay. Okay. Yeah. Okay.
Happy to help.
Okay. Good. Well. Since you have the microphone here, let's segue to a little Champlain data here.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm glad to be a part of this event tonight. So my name is Campbell, and I'm on the science team at the Lake Champlain Basin Program. And I'm going to tell you the story behind the data that we are going to be working on sonifying, turning into music tonight. So as Glenn mentioned, one of the ways that scientists approach the problem of understanding the world around us is by trying to interpret data, have numerical measurements, think about how we can change the landscape or whatever we're interested in measuring into numbers, and then being able to look at those numbers through time. So in Lake Champlain, one thing that we're interested in is water quality. And we measure that in a number of different ways. A lot of times we look at elements or ions that are dissolved in the water and other measures of water quality. Traditionally, what this has looked like in terms of monitoring is we actually have scientists, people who go out on a boat, collect a water sample, take it back to the lab, and do all sorts of measurements to tell you what's in that water, and use that as a measurement of water quality. Recently, we've acquired some new technology that helps us take those measurements in kind of more real time and get a higher resolution of data. So the data that we're going to be looking at today comes from one of our water quality monitoring buoys. So this buoy actually takes a measurement of 8 different water quality parameters, which I'll talk a little bit more about the parameters in a couple minutes. It takes a measurement once every 15 minutes. So now instead of maybe once every other week when someone's able to actually get out in the field, scoop some water and take it back to the lab, we can see the water quality changing much more in real time. So here's a couple pictures of the buoy. So on the right, you see the buoy as it's deployed. This particular buoy is in the La Motte River. So it's actually anchored in the river, and then we have a safety chain attaching it. You can see that bridge in the photo. That's the Route 2 bridge right after you get off the exit for the islands off of 89. So we've probably all driven over that many times. Not sure if you knew there was a data buoy out there collecting data right under your wheels. And the picture on the left shows kind of the guts of the buoy. So that instrument that is on the person's knee there in the picture is actually the sensors. So they sit a little bit below the buoy, a little bit beneath the water surface, and like I said, every 15 minutes they take a measurement of these different water quality parameters. So one of the stories behind the data that we're going to be taking a look at tonight comes from the perspective of this buoy as it was in the La Motte River during the flood event that we had last month. So this buoy had a wild ride. So typically it's just hanging out here on the surface of the water, taking that measurement every 15 minutes. But as the water levels started to rise, we actually got to a point where this buoy was completely submerged. So usually we can kind of communicate with the buoy. It actually can connect to the cell network, and it actually sends that data to a website so we can look at it shortly after it's collected. We were keeping an eye as the water was starting to rise, and we saw it getting higher and higher up on this buoy, which is supposed to be floating, so that wasn't ideal. And actually at one point, we couldn't find the buoy. We had no idea. This is, tens of thousands of dollars of scientific instrumentation. We weren't sure if the current had gotten so strong that this buoy had actually gotten washed away. It was no longer transmitting data. That wasn't a great sign. So we were worried that we were going to have to go out into the lake and actually search for the buoy to see if it had gotten washed downstream. However, as the water levels started to recede, I was actually able to go out in the field and take a look from the shore, try to find the buoy, and as I was looking over the river, I could see just the tiniest bit of yellow starting to stick back up from the water. So I excitedly told my teammates that the buoy was still there. It held on for dear life through the flood. And eventually, as the water continued to recede, the buoy actually began communicating again. We weren't sure, it's not supposed to be completely submerged. But as it began communicating, we realized that even though it was underwater, it was still able to take its measurements every 15 minutes. So as scientists, as data geeks, when we got all of these numbers, a real-time record of what was coming down the La Motte River during this major flood event, we were really excited to get to see the story of the flood, both from the perspective of the buoy and from the data it's collecting. So just to get a visual sense of the data that we're going to be looking at before we get to the auditory sense, I've chosen a couple parameters that had some pretty dramatic changes, as you can imagine, we sometimes get during a flood event. So on this graph, there's two measurements that the buoy was taking. The blue line at the top shows temperature, and the orange line, closer to the bottom, but obviously with that big spike there, is turbidity. So turbidity is a measurement of the clarity of the water. And along the bottom here, this is time that we have. So this is a record of temperature and turbidity over time. And it starts at the beginning of July and ends at the end of July. So over time, you can see everything, the scale is pretty dramatic here, since we have that huge increase in turbidity. So you can imagine from the perspective of the buoy, if we're thinking about that orange line, stable, 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 and then suddenly we see this huge spike in turbidity. So as we had the floodwaters coming off of the landscape and coming down the La Motte River, there was sediment and other dissolved ions and other particulate matter coming off of the landscape that got washed into the river and reduced the clarity as this flood event was happening. So you can see turbidity starts off pretty low, spikes pretty dramatically. We have a couple smaller spikes, and then at the end of the month, everything kind of settles back out to the pre-flood condition. The other parameter we have here is temperature. You can see there's a little bit more variation, kind of day to day or week to week in the temperature record. But at the same time that we see that huge spike in turbidity, we see a drop in temperature. You can see that sharp, almost vertical line down. So the water that was getting pushed into the river, coming off of the landscape, ultimately beginning in the sky and coming into the river, was a much lower temperature than the water that's been in the river system and has had time to sit close to the surface and warm up as it sits in the flood and travels, or sits in the river and travels towards Lake Champlain. As that buoy was holding on for dear life, it was able to collect all these data for us and give us a really interesting picture of exactly what was happening in the river during the flood. So I'm really excited to see how this is going to turn out terms of the musical exercise.
I mean, for any of you who have seen a musical score, you could just imagine two instruments playing those two things, right? Okay, with those notes going.
How much data can the buoy store? I mean, can it store a year's worth of data?
So, can I borrow that microphone again? Thank you. So it actually doesn't store much of the data since it is able to communicate it real time. I'm not sure what its total capacity is. We do take it out every winter because it's not made to be in the river once there's ice in the river that can really damage the sensors. But it's typically in the water between May and November. So we have a several-month record for the last 2 years, and we hope to be continuing it into the future of that real-time data set.
How many years has it been in service?
This is the second year. Last year was kind of our pilot season, and this year we knew a bit more what we were doing when we put it in the water. So.
Wonderful. Okay, so this is what we're gonna try here a bit. Madeline's going to give you folks some pencils and some paper, and we're going to see what might come out of this little chunks of this data set here. So make the temperature here. Okay.
Yep.
Do you know offhand? Okay, the lowest and the highest values.
I don't know off the top of my head.
Okay. Let's just scan these a little bit here.
Yeah, we can sort it real quickly in the spreadsheet.
Okay.
Here
Okay.
I can drive the data.
Okay.
Should give you the pencils when you do it.
26.3 degrees Celsius. Down to 18.29.
Okay. So let's start with a couple of numbers here. What was that first one?
The highest is 26.
And the other one is
If you do it.
okay, essentially 18.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. So there's a couple steps to the process. Okay, and this is not an individual test. Okay, you can all help each other out here. Okay, this is a team effort. Okay, there's a couple steps to the process of sonification. Okay, the first thing that we do, okay, in the mathematical world, okay, is that we find the range of the data, okay, which is what I was just asking about. Okay, so the highest data point right now is 26.3. Okay, and the lowest data point we're going to round is 18.3. So if we subtract those two, what number do we get next?
The first number was 3. 8.0.
8, right? Okay. So the range of our data is 8. Okay. Well, goodness gracious. Okay, if we include that octave, do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. Okay. So in the sonification world, the next thing that we do, we have to divide up the range into 8 chunks, into 8 equal pieces. Okay, so that means that that down on the low end of it, okay, if we're starting with 18.3, okay, that first chunk is going to be 18.3 to 19.3. Okay. Then 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, and 26. Okay, so on the, you can do it horizontally or vertically. Just write out these eight little sections, right? Okay, and each of those 8 sections is going to have a range of data that we'll find. So that first one, okay, you'll label 18.3 to actually 19.2. Right. Then the next one, the next little chunk is 19.3 to 20.2. Okay. Then the third one, okay, 20.3 to 22.2. Okay. You're going to see why this is going to work in a second. Just trust me. Okay. Yeah. Or yeah. And a slope. Sorry. Yeah. So now we've divided up our range into 8 equal chunks. Okay. Now, okay, next to each one of those chunks, okay, the very first one, you're going to put do. So do is going to be the note that is activated by any data point in your set that falls in that 18.3 to 19.2 range. The next one will be re. The next chunk mi. And fa, sol, la, ti, and do.
So for any measurement that you find, you play that specific note.
Right. And so what this is the way of translating the number to the note. Okay? So let's just play a little bit here. Okay? 26.3. That's going to be the high do, right? That's the top of our data set, isn't it? Right? Right. Okay, well, 26.29, that's going to be the same note, right?
Yeah, I sorted it, so we
Okay.
probably want to reset it.
Oh, okay.
So the data are in order.
Thank you. Oh,
No worries.
my goodness gracious. Okay.
Yeah.
For data sets with a larger range of data and a larger number of members in the data set, do you find that multiples of 7 work better? Or do you find that 7 works best?
It can work in lots of different ways. And actually the choice of the particular way that you want to use the math is one of the creative choices. Okay? And as I find working with my scientific colleagues, they do stuff with data all the time. Okay, resorting it, re-looking at it all the time. And so this is one of these instances where scientists and musicians are actually thinking very much alike. Okay? Okay, so we're back in order now, right?
Correct. It's in order by time.
Okay. Okay, so here's what we're going to do for those of you, okay, who have been writing down all these numbers here. Okay, we have our translation code, our code here, right? Okay, we pick a number, that's going to make a note. That's going to make a musical note for us. Okay, so let's just start at the top of the data set, right here. Okay, 23.6. Okay. Actually, I'm going to keep track of things here as well. Another pencil over there? There we go. Okay, so 23.6, what is our first note? La. Okay, 23.5. 4.
That's so long.
Also la? We got 2 la's. 23.58. Whole lot of la's here.
Once every 15 minutes, it doesn't change that quickly.
Yeah. Okay. So let's actually zip down to number 8 here. 24.03. What would that be? T. Oh, now we're talking here. And we get several T's here, right? Okay, if we just scan those notes, we see a lot of 24s, right? See these? Okay, so one of the things that we're learning about the data is that it kind of looks like it sticks in one area for a while before it shifts, right? As opposed to it being volatile every single data point going up and down. Okay, we're already starting to kind of get a sense for this thing. We're going to get a whole bunch of la's, we're going to get a whole bunch of T's. A whole bunch of T's, look at all those 24s there, right?
If you had it a week later, it would all of a sudden go,
And so now we're going to get a whole bunch of 23s, right? Okay, 23 is what? So we get a whole bunch of la's. Again, going back to la's. We're scanning down here. Whole bunches of la's, right? Okay. Oh, here's some 25s. What's that?
A high dough.
And we get a bunch of 25s. Now we're back to 24s. Back to 25, right? Back to high dough again, right?
It's a little shark, a little high shark.
It's a little baby shark. Then now we're back to 24s again. T, okay. And back to 25 again. Right, dough. Lots of 25s.
Lots of doughs.
Okay, 26s, that's still
dough.
there, right? Let's just scan all the way down until we start to get some different.
We're getting close to the flood, so.
We're getting close to the flood, okay, okay.
Yep,
Anticipation.
yes.
Okay, 24s was what again?
T.
Okay, so we're going back down to T. We're getting close. Hang on, oh, here we go. Yes, 23s. 22s?
So,
21s? 20?
20 is fine.
19 is Ray.
Then we got rays. Oh, a little volatility here. Going back to me again, right? Back to Ray again with the 19s, right? Let's just take that much of it right now, okay? So what we learned here was that was that, okay, to take every single one of these notes, we get a lot of repetition. Okay, so maybe what we want to do is to compress those, okay, into notes, okay, that then can turn into a melody of some kind here, right? So let's just hear what this data has given us so far. Here is this in the key of C. Okay, the first part of the data set here starts here. That could turn into a whole bunch of stuff. Orchestras in that. There can be choirs in that. There can be lots of different things. I haven't run the numbers on this, so this is the first time I've heard of it too. Right. And so we start to see how the translation happens, and we get this kind of core musical content to start the composition process with. And so this is a little taste of what is to come. Okay, as you know, I'll be writing some music for choirs and probably the Orchestra of Northern New York, and then we'll have three other composers writing music for various kinds of ensembles, various kinds of music styles. I'm interviewing composers this week, actually, so I'm looking forward to nailing them down and getting them into the project here. But so much of this is really a chance for us to return this very ancient relationship between the sciences and the arts. This notion that Pythagoras thought that music was numbers in time, and that music was the best way to express what the universe was and the movements of the heavenly bodies. Galileo, he played the lute. He was a very good lute player, and Galileo's dad, Vincenzo, he was a composer at the time. Oh, and a very rebellious composer at that, pushing the limits of music theory and tuning in ways that a lot of the other contemporaries in the late 1500s were very angry at Vincenzo Galilei for this, and so the young Galileo not only learned to play lute from his dad, but also learned how to push against the assumptions of the world around him, right? Okay, and he would go on to do that with our understanding of the heavens and so many other interesting scientific things that Galileo did. It's actually around the time of Galileo where the sciences and the arts start to part. In the way that we think of ourselves as intellectual beings, we start to separate those two things. So now in the public school, the math classroom is over here, but the music room is over there, right? And in order for the math teacher to get that necessary break that they need in the middle of the day, because teaching is hard work, well, all the kids that were in the math class are now in the music class. And that means that the math teacher and the music teacher can never teach together because the schedule prohibits it, right? They can't collaborate in front of kids and to show this back and forth, between people of different knowledge bases and to build these new connections, build these new ways of understanding the world around us. So we're going to be doing a bunch of that in the next 2 years here with the Lake Champlain Basin Program, and so you should all keep your eyes open for concert events or other presentations like this. Perhaps once when we get our composers on board, we might put together some events where they can show their work in progress. Maybe we can follow them. There's the beginnings of our website up, which you can all follow the work of these composers. We'll make sure all that information gets out to you. It's going to be a wonderful journey here in the next 2 years, and so thank you for kicking us off from the dock here on this journey, and what I hope you do is that you go back and like pull down like weather.com and start sonifying the humidity data at home here. So thank you so much for all the folks that made this happen. Okay, for Kate, for Madeline, for Jim, for Colleen, and Mike's wonderful place here that we're in. So thanks for coming out tonight.
Well, as a composer, I've been working with scientists a lot, okay? With the European Space Agency, I was down in Antarctica with the National Science Foundation. And when I saw this opportunity posted by the Lake Champlain Basin Program, but I figured, geez, what a wonderful opportunity we might have to bring in some composers of different musical genres, different traditions, and to use this process of sonification as the thing that binds us all together, okay? And to try to tease out these new musical voices from the Champlain watershed.
So you'll take data from the scientists and create music.
Right.
And you've invited a number of composers to come in and take part in this process.
Right, yeah, so since I'm going to be writing some music and then 3 others will be, okay, we'll have 4 different interpretations of these data sets. Yeah.
When you approached the scientists and said, this is what I'd like to do, what was their reaction?
Well, it depends on the scientist, okay? When I talked to Kurt Stager at Paul Smith's College, Kurt's a banjo player. Kurt's wonderful musician. In addition to his science work, he was immediately intrigued. Okay, and actually when we performed the Wolf Lake piece from the Adirondack Folk Opera, Kurt said he almost cried, okay, because he never believed he would be able to hear his work, right. Other scientists that maybe are not musicians themselves, or maybe folks that have just really spent most of their careers working within their discipline. Okay, sometimes it's a little bit more of a discussion with those folks to make these kind of connections. But what I find out over and over again is that there's so much overlap between the processes that a scientist uses with data and how a musician processes sound.
So the composers will create pieces and then you'll share them with the public. You already have Helen DeMung and other folks who are excited to be part of this.
Yeah, we have of the musical ensembles that have already signed up. Okay, I have a hunch we're going to be getting some more to join in the effort soon. But this first sort of core of ensembles includes the Northern Lights Choir under Helen DeMung's direction, the Orchestra of Northern New York, okay, and then the Cour Classique de l'Outaouais from Quebec under the direction of Tiffaine Legrand. So we have already we have performers from New York and Quebec and in the lineup here. So
Obviously, you created Timbuktu and did what you did with that, and this is another new, really creative way to make music that maybe a lot of people wouldn't necessarily think of. Is that you would team up scientists like this with musicians and see what happens.
yeah, I just think that as we're faced more and more with the challenges of climate change, where where everybody's feeling it now. We have to be able to listen to the planet in new ways than we've never done before, because we have to respond to what the planet is trying to tell us. We have to change things we've been doing for a long time, to not only just preserve our natural environment, but to dance with it. Okay, to enjoy it in new ways, and I think that the using the sonification process gives an empirical connection to that part of nature that we're writing about. It's common for composers going back a long time to write music about nature. Okay, but if but the process usually is the composer going out into that nature, experiencing it, and responding it to it in a very individualistic kind of way, right? Like the great Czech composer Smetana. He writes a piece called the Moldau, okay, which is this musical picture of a river that starts as a little trickle and ends in a big roar. And that's fine. Okay, I like writing music that way too, but the sonification process actually lets the river, lets the lake be the first part of the creative process. We start with what the lake wants to say, and then as composers we approach that conversation and see where it takes us.
And is the hope that you will perhaps reach people that maybe you wouldn't have reached before by doing this process, by trying something new like this? You talk about the urgent climate change message. Maybe through music you'll be able to reach people, get people to pay attention.
Yeah, I think that what we all need to do, goes beyond the simple notion of just marketing climate change. Okay, what we need to do is have a much deeper relationship with the planet, and this kind of creative process, I think, gives us just one more tool in the toolbox to reach people's minds, to reach people's hearts, to dream up new ideas that we haven't thought of yet.
What was your reaction when you first heard about this proposal, this project, taking scientific data and composing music from it?
I was really excited. I'm a very musical person myself, so the perspective to take this data that people sometimes have trouble understanding or connecting to and put it into a more tangible format for a lot of folks was really exciting to me.
And you mentioned, so the data you're using is actually great data, because great in a sense, and let me rephrase that, not great, obviously the event was terrible for everybody, but it was quite a major flooding event that you took the data from, so it was, it wasn't where you have the river going up a little bit down a little bit each day. You had some pretty dramatic changes because it was at the height of the flooding last month.
Yeah, the data already tell a really dramatic story, so I thought that would be a great data set to try to see how that would translate into that musical form and really put the perspective of the flood in a different format.
And it's on the La Motte River. I forgot where the buoy was.
Yes, the buoy's on the La Motte River, close to the mouth of Lake Champlain.
And where, I should know where that is.
That's okay. So the buoy is anchored to the Route 2 bridge. That's kind of, you go over it when you get off the Islands exit off of 89, and you're heading towards the Islands.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Good. And so Glenn was just mentioning, he hopes that perhaps this will reach a new audience, perhaps at a time when we're really trying to raise awareness about climate change, that perhaps this will reach people, that this is a new way. Is that sort of what you're hopeful as well, that it might be a way to reach a number of people and really drive home some important issues that we're dealing with right now?
Yeah, definitely. Beyond climate change, I think just the day-to-day environmental change, putting into perspective the challenges, but also, water quality winds that the lake is facing.
And what do you think? How do you think this will play out over the next 2 years? Are you kind of excited about the potential here, getting 3 or 4 composers together to see what they do with your data?
Yeah, I'm really excited and curious to see how it's going to turn out among those different media of music. So we're not totally sure that we're going to be using the buoy data that I talked about tonight as a final product. But if we do, again, I'm really excited to see how that would translate.